It's a rather interesting position coming from a man on a crusade against the evils of technology.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth. Live.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel and log on armoroftruth.net.
Greetings, everybody. Greetings. Armor of Truth Live, number 236. I think it's 236. I think I've got the wrong number on the title there, folks. We'll fix it later. This is Armor of Truth Live number 236, and today we're we're going into a very deep topic that would probably take a whole semester, a couple semesters to get through all of this. There is an article that was recently out about a school system, about the whole public education system in India. They had removed Darwin. That means they had removed the theory of evolution by natural selection. We're going to talk about that, but we're going to talk about that in terms of, what's happening here in America as well. So let's get started, because the reason this is important for you is because, we have to understand this is the religion. This is the underlying religion of everything that we see happening in our world today. The World Health Organization, the WEF. Have to be careful saying those words because algorithms don't like it. They shut you down if they think you're talking about them. Governments, universities, the school systems. And the problem is most people, probably just about all the people, don't understand that this is what's being taught. A lot of people in the church don't quite get it either. And that's why it's so important for us to talk about this today. In human history, let's say, if human history is the story of a creature who molts from ape to angel, or as Friedrich Nietzsche claimed, from beast to Superman, then somewhere along the way it seems that we must become machines, right? This is Dr. Eric Davis in his book Technosis. He writes this. He says, "This destiny is rooted in our recent historical evolution. For as the engines of civilization pulled us farther and farther away from the unpredictable and often spiteful dance of nature, we withdrew from the animistic imagination that once immersed us in a living network of material forces and ruling intelligences. We started dreaming of transcending the old gods, of controlling our animal souls, of building an urban heaven on a mastered earth. We became modern. Though technology was by no means the only way that humans expressed or inculcated their experience of standing apart from nature, it certainly became the Western way, the modern West could even be said to have made a pact with machines, those systematic assemblages of working parts and potentials that by definition lack a vital spirit, a soul grounded in the metaphysical order of things. And so today, now that we have technologized our environment and isolated the self within a scientific frame of mind, we no longer turn to nature to echo our state. And I would add to Dr. Davis's commentary there and say we no longer turn to God. In fact, we no longer turn to truth. Dr. Davis goes on and writes, now remember, Dr. Davis isn't necessarily writing from a Christian worldview perspective here. Dr. Eric Davis researches and writes about pretty much all things esoteric, especially in America. He says the American self is a Gnostic self because it believes on a deep and abiding level that authenticity arises from independence. That authenticity arises from independence. Now, doesn't that ring true? He says an independence that is at once natural, sovereign, and solitary. When Thomas Jefferson wrote that he had sworn on the altar of God Almighty eternal hostility against all forms of tyranny over the minds of men, he was articulating the structure of feeling and belief that informs the American self. This structure was enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and in the Bill of Rights. And though these documents are secular and political, their rhetoric does not derive solely from Enlightenment notions about the inalienable rights of man. America's political embrace of the modern individual was also motivated by the land's curious spiritual temperament, a temperament that, in its quest to discover a motive ground, a foundation, a meta-narrative, a worldview outside of governments and established religious institutions. In fact, it appears to be that what was established in America was the very antithesis of religion as we usually conceive it. He says we should take seriously Harold Bloom's willfully heretical argument that the American religion is not Christian. At least not in the way that Europe was Christian. Speaking of the Reformation and on back through Crusades. But rather, American religion is Gnostic. Whether finding his evidence in Mormonism or the Baptist Church or the poetry of Emerson, Bloom describes the core of the American religion as the unshakable conviction that there is something in the self that precedes creation. Ecclesiastes 3, there it is. God has set eternity on everyone's heart. And he goes on to say, and that for all our Whitman-esque desire to merge with groups, we can never fully trust external social institutions to care for the aboriginal freedom of this solitary spark with its personal relationship to nature, or a Gnostic Jesus. In a crucial passage, Bloom writes that the American religion does not believe or trust, it knows, though it wants always to know yet more. The American religion manifests itself as an information anxiety, but that seems perhaps a better definition of nearly all religion than the attempts to see faith as a compulsive neurosis or as a drug, as Karl Marx put it, the opium for the masses. He says it is neither obsessive nor intoxicating to ask, where were we? And where are we journeying? Or best of all, what makes us free? The American religion has always asked what makes us free, but political freedom has very little to do with that. Unquote. Quite true. Political freedom has very little to do with true freedom. This is the mistake of the anarchist. And if it were only political freedom that Americans sought, right? But sadly, no. Our freedom has mutated. And today we see a generation who is seeking freedom from everything. They seek freedom from responsibility, freedom from their own bodies and their own genders, and most horrifying, they seek freedom from the moral law of God and His good design. So today, that's what we're talking about today. How did we get here? How did we get to the spot today where somehow or another something like transgenderism is celebrated, where men can beat women senseless, and it's called inclusivity in sports? How did we ever get to that? Well, in 1932, Aldous Huxley published Brave New World, a novel that presents a dystopian society where the masses were controlled and exacted, not by fear and punishment, but with pleasure and distraction. To the surprise of Huxley himself, that fictional dystopian world is being realized much faster than anyone expected. These quotes by Huxley from Brave New World Revisited. He says, the society described in Brave New World, this is Huxley talking about his book Brave New World. He says, the society described there is a world state in which war has been eliminated and where the first aim of the rulers is at all costs to keep the subjects from making trouble. This they achieve by, among other methods, legalizing a degree of sexual freedom made possible by the abolition of family that practically guarantees the Brave New Worlders against any form of destructive or creative emotional tension. In 1984, the lust for power is satisfied by inflicting pain. In Brave New World, by inflicting a hardly less humiliating pleasure. The future dictator's subjects will be painlessly regimented by a corps of highly trained social engineers. The challenge of social engineering in our time, writes an enthusiastic advocate of this new science, is like the challenge of technical engineering 50 years ago. If the first half of the 20th century was the era of technical engineers, the second half may well be the era of social engineers. And the 21st century, I suppose, will be the era of world controllers, said Huxley. And he was on the money. It will be the era of world controllers. The scientific caste system, neo-feudalism, and Brave New World. So that's what we're looking at today. How did we get here? How did we get to the point where these kind of ideologies are just promoted and pushed to the edges and closer and closer and closer? We keep pushing society closer to obliteration. As history has graphically demonstrated, the various religious crusades to immanentize the eschaton, or to realize heaven on earth as a creation of mankind, are deadly serious. This truth is tangibly evidenced by the atrocities committed by the socio-political utopians of secular Gnosticism. Both Auschwitz and the Soviet Gulag are products of the same jihad. The secular theocracies that have waged this jihad have consistently been scientific dictatorships, edified by Charles Darwin and his theory. Inevitably, the Gnostic myth of Darwinism guides its adherents to the same conclusion. Evolution requires man's assistance. Through societal interventions, socio-political utopians believe that humanity can facilitate its own evolutionary development and eventually immanentize the eschaton, can bring heaven to earth, can just create it right here. Freemason and Darwinian apologist, known as Darwin's bulldog himself, another Huxley, yes. Thomas Henry Huxley wrote, "Social progress means checking of the cosmic process at every step, and the substitution for it of another, which may be called the ethical processes, the end of which is not the survival of those who happen to be the fittest in respect of the whole of the conditions which exist, but survival of those who are ethically the best." That is evolution. That is evolutionary naturalism. And I pray that the Lord would allow for some skeptics to see this video, to drop in, to see the title and the thumbnail and drop in here and ready to debunk this crazy Christian, because they're going to hear, you're going to hear an argument tonight that you probably haven't heard. If you can walk away from this presentation, I'm talking to you, atheist or just New Age skeptic or whatever you might be, someone who thinks that Christ in the way, the truth, and the life, the only way to God, thinks that's just some made-up doctrine from the past, some anachronistic mumbo-jumbo. Go ahead. Challenge yourself to listen to this whole argument. For example, here we are in the 21st century with everything we need to live, pretty near a utopia, right? But no, we are more at odds than ever. How did we get there? What is, well, let's just take the temperature, for example, of what it looks like in the world around us now. We're disenchanted. As Eric Davis was writing there, from a different perspective, to be sure, but we're disenchanted. Nobody really believes in the transcendent authority anymore. It's my authority. It's what I need. It's what I want. How did disenchantment arise? Many causes can be cited, perhaps. Renaissance humanism, scientific revolution, the rise of the police state, the Protestant Reformation. All of these are right. This is Charles Taylor. Charles Taylor, Canadian philosopher, sociologist. He says that the root cause comes earlier in the medieval period, and the rage for order that expressed itself in the desire and attempt to close the gap between the church leadership and the commoner in terms of piety and religious practice. Hans Boersma speaks of the medieval revolt of nature that set the stage for disenchantment. These precursors to disenchantment include, well, that's a tough word, the juridicizing of the church under Pope Gregory, the rediscovery of Aristotelian philosophy and in the 12th and 13th century, and the increasing separation of the authority of Scripture and the church in the 14th and 15th centuries. And in the 16th century, controversy over the separation of nature and the supernatural. And so we get to today. where physicist Sean Carroll, astrophysicist, writes in his book. He says this is one of the experts out there. You know, this is one of those who will most certainly an evolutionist. He says categories such as male and female are human inventions, stories we tell because it helps us make sense of our world. Male and female, they're just made up. And so you see, this is the authority level. This Sean Carroll, he's in rarefied air. He's up there in the authority class. He says the basic stuff of reality is quantum wave function. It's particles and forces. Whatever the fundamental stuff turns out to be, everything else is an overlay, right? Male and female. Just human inventions, stories we tell ourselves because it helps us make sense of our world. Matter and motion. Matter and empirically discoverable motion. And so from this thinking, we now live in something very close to, or maybe it's already there, a technocracy, a system of governance where experts in various fields, science, engineering, economics, they're the ones in charge of decision making. Right? The church, that's superstition. Instead of politicians or elected representatives, we have experts now. The idea that is that these experts who possess the technical knowledge and expertise required to address complex issues would be better equipped to make those decisions. Right? The ones, you know, that's in the best interest of society. It's for your good. That is stakeholderism. Technocracy emerged as a political movement in the early 20th century during a time of rapid technological development, and it died away. But the term needs to be brought back out. Those proponents back then believed that traditional public political institutions were not equipped to handle the challenges of a modern industrialized society, and that a more rational scientific approach was necessary to manage the complexities of the modern world. But in practice, technocracy has been implemented in various ways since then. And we see it today. Experts being appointed to advisory positions within government, you know, unelected people. The World Health Organization is a perfect example of technocracy and unelected experts having control over governments even. The Fourth Industrial Revolution promotes and implements rapid change to technology, industries, and social patterns, and in processes by increasing interconnectivity. The Fourth Industrial Revolution will occur at the level of the human being, where surveillance goes under the skin, Yuval Harari said. This term was made popular by the World Economic Forum, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. That was Klaus Schwab. A part of the phase of industrial change is the joining of technologies like artificial intelligence, gene editing, to advanced robotics, to blur the lines between the physical, digital, and biological worlds. This is where many are fearing that the lust for transhumanism might be expressed. And what I suggest to you tonight is that evolutionary naturalism, the logical conclusion, is transhumanism. Fundamental shifts are taking place in how the global production and supply network operates. The aim is automation of everything. Probably more relevant and most concerning, the Fourth Industrial Revolution concepts also represent a social, political, and economic shift to an era of embedded connectivity distinguished by the omniuse and commonness of technology. You'll own nothing and be happy, right? Let's expand that out. You'll have no privacy, and you'll deal with it. The changes, so all this changes the way we experience and know the world around us. It's to initiate the world into an augmented social reality, a truly hyper-real world where anything is possible, almost. There's a fatal flaw in this theory of evolution. and man's desire to be autonomous, to be his own God. Someone out there might say, and again, I pray that the Lord will bring you by here, skeptic, atheists. I want to talk to you, care about you. We love you. We don't want to see you destroyed. But there's a fatal flaw in your worldview. This theory of evolution, man's desire to be autonomous. Right? The atheist is his own God. He wants to be. One might say, how could that possibly be a deadly notion? I just want to be responsible for myself. That's a good thing. Libertarianism, right? Well, after we do our analysis of this article here, I want to come back and discuss this. Why the separation of theology from science and the search for a unified body of truth apart from Christ is deadly. In fact, science and theology have departed. They've parted ways back in the Enlightenment. But make no mistake about it, my friends. Today, science has become a religion. Scientism. And here's the point. Here's the underlying theme for tonight's show. Evolutionary naturalism has caused more suffering than any other doctrine, religion, or ideology in history. It's a bold statement, but I will show you how that's true tonight, so stay tuned. For example, the WHO, the WEF, the media, the government, academic institutions worldwide, hospital networks, just about everywhere you look. There are all these parts, these gears in a global machine that form a global scientific dictatorship right now, that exists now. And it is truly a one-world religion. And its core dogma is Darwinism, evolutionary naturalism, or the theory of evolution by natural selection, the satanic spirit behind it. It can be seen everywhere you look today. From vaccine mandates to abortion as a fundamental right to the 2020 lockdowns of citizens and the shutdown of churches and the arrest of pastors. All of these things are a result of evolutionary naturalism, a mixed up thinking, lost our way. So what are we talking about here? What are we actually talking about? What is this theory, and how can we show it to be bankrupt? Not only bankrupt, but deadly. The theory of 19th century English naturalist Charles Darwin centers on the concept of species adapting and evolving over time through a process of natural selection, acting on random mutation of species. That's basically it. We'll explain this in much more detail as we go, piece by piece. But Darwinism has been and still is the core dogma of authoritarian regimes. Authoritarianism and ethnic oppression worldwide, they all have one thing in common. It's Darwinism. In a very interesting twist in our current narrative, Darwinism was recently removed from school textbooks. And science educators, pundits, and influencers are crying out and urging the government to restore that material on evolution immediately. They insist that Darwinism is fundamental to understanding our place in the world. That the theory of evolution is fundamental to understanding our place in the world. That means that evolutionary naturalism, the theory of evolution by natural selection, is we can't understand who we are, where we came from, why we're here, or where we're going without it. That's the claim. And so tonight, we're going to expose that as the most dangerous world religion of them all. Our children are growing up in a post-Christian culture in which the public often views people of faith as irrelevant or even in some cases extremists. But the world desperately needs people of faith who can contribute to public life and enhance public conversation. So how do we raise up a generation of Daniels to be the voices of faith in a cultural Babylon? The challenge is to uncompromisingly share absolute truth while not forgetting about grace. We should be about the business of dispensing God's grace in Christ. The 21st century will require believers to navigate an environment of suspicion and skepticism. J.P. Moreland, apologist, philosopher, he explains, as the ideas that constitute scientism have become more pervasive in our culture, the Western world has turned increasingly secular, and the power centers of culture, the universities, the media, entertainment industry, even the Supreme Court, have become increasingly to regard religion as just a private superstition. That's fine for you over there, but that doesn't belong over here in this sphere. It's no surprise then that when our children go to college, more and more of them are just giving up on Christianity. Scientism says that the hard sciences alone have the intellectual authority to define reality. We will show you the horrifying danger of that presupposition and provide the background and tools to defeat this irrational, truth-hating, anti-human abomination that has become the status quo. And here's our main story tonight. Darwinism has been expunged from India's school textbooks. And of course, science educators, pundits, and influencers, they're crying out and they are urging, they're pleading with the government to restore this material immediately because they insist that Darwinism is fundamental to understanding our place in the world. So we're going to look at this article. Who's going to fly the Christian flag? Right? If it's true, if what I'm saying is true, if evolutionary naturalism has caused more suffering than any other ideology or theory in the world, who's going to fly our flag? Who's going to stand up and talk about it? A true Christian speaks with his life. That's a full commitment. This is a truth you have to be willing to die for. A true Christian speaks with his life, with the way he lives, by standing firm on the doctrine of Christ in the swirling current of world events and human confusion. We are the conscience of the world, and they hate us for it. And so we have to accept that. We must accept it. It must be our joy, in fact, because that's what Jesus said they would do. So if they're hating us, we must be on the right track. We have to accept it and never compromise this message. It's not our message. It is the eternal truth of the living Creator God, and He has called us to carry it into a world that will not just reject it, they want us gone. The evidence is plain. You can see it. Approximately 100 million professing Christians are under persecution in the world right now. That is far more than any other people group in the world. Who will fly our flag? We will. So the theory of the 19th century English naturalist, Charles Darwin, attempts to explain how species or biological life forms change over time. The theory suggests that organisms with advantageous traits are more likely to survive and reproduce and pass those traits on to future generations. Not too much to argue with there. However, that's not the whole story. Darwinian orthodoxy proclaims that this process occurs over millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and billions of years. Billions of years. That's all you need. You need chance and time. Just need enough time. If you have enough time, a banana can become a baboon, and a baboon can become a banker. All you need is time and mutations. Now we're getting to the sticky stuff. Origins. Where did we come from? How did we get here? Can the theory of evolution even approach that question? Is that an important question? I think it's probably the first question. Well, approach it they do, and I am talking about the priests and the faithful followers of this fatally flawed faith tradition. Objectors watching this video will not appreciate my referring to evolutionary naturalism as a faith tradition or a religion, but I will show you exactly why it is exactly that. Stay tuned. I'll get to that part very soon. So let's work our way through this article very quickly. It's not that long. I just want to make sure you see all the parts of this article. This is very interesting. Darwinism expunged from India's school textbooks. Science educators are urging the restoration of the material in Darwin. After it was removed to lighten the load of students after the pandemic. Science educators in India are urging the government to restore material on Darwinian evolution. Let me read from the... There we go. The National Council for Education Research and Training, NCERT, deleted material relating to the theory from school books on the grounds that the study load on school children needs to be lightened after the pandemic. From this month, this was in April actually, which is the start of the academic year, material on evolution no longer figures in grade 9 and grade 10 science books, while the chapter titled Evolution and Heredity taught to 11th and 12th graders has been reduced to heredity. And a module on Charles Darwin and his work has been erased. An open appeal signed by hundreds of leading scientists and science educators that was released on April 22nd said, quote, the changes introduced as a temporary measure during the pandemic are being continued even when schooling has gone back to offline mode. In a pointed reference to the pandemic rationale given by NCERT, the statement stressed the relevance of Darwin's theory today, and they say the principles, quote, the principles of natural selection help us to understand how any pandemic progresses or why certain species go extinct, among many other critical issues. TV Venkateshwaran, a scientist at Vigyan Prasar, a Department of Science and Technology body, an organization anyway that aims to popularize science, said the deletions were symptomatic of the handling of science education in India. I'll skip this section because he's really just criticizing the way they handle it. He says things are just deleted randomly. And then it goes on to say, that science education should be about communicating key concepts about the world through modern science. Otherwise, we'll be living in 14th century perceptions that can generate friction and lead to violence. So, this scientist says that removing Darwin's theory is going to lead to violence. I will show you without a doubt how it is completely the opposite. Darwin's theory is the root of most of the violence in the 20th century in our world. They also say, quote, the Human Genome Project, for example, has shown that humankind is one. It has pulled the rug on divisive ideas of race and caste. Also, evolution points to the interconnection among all living beings in the world. Objections to the theory of evolution by the ruling pro-Hindu Bharatiya Janata Party were first made known in 2018 when Satya Pal Singh, then Minister of State in the Education Ministry, declared in Parliament that nobody, including our ancestors, in writing or orally, has said they saw an ape turning into a man. Hard to disagree with the minister there, right? Never been observed. Continues, he says, quote, Darwin's theory is scientifically wrong. It needs to change in school and college curricula. Singh was then taken on by India's 3 main science academies. Look at this, 3 academies coming after one man. The Indian Academy of Science, the Indian National Science Academy, and the National Academy of Sciences, which issued a joint statement that said, quote, it would be retrograde. It would be a step backwards to remove the teaching of the theory of evolution from school and college curricula, or to dilute this by offering non-scientific explanations or myths. That would be the religious ones. It says, the theory of evolution by natural selection, as propounded by Charles Darwin and developed and extended subsequently, has had a major influence on modern biology and medicine, and indeed all of modern science. It is widely supported across the world. Opposition in India to Darwinism is similar to Christian orthodoxy's problem with the idea that humans evolved from ape-like bipeds, rather than the biblical idea that God created man in his own image. It goes on to say, historically, there has never been any conflict between Hindu religious orthodoxy and the theory of evolution, simply because there has never been an orthodox view of creationism until the votaries of Hindutva, a politicized version of Hinduism, began propagating their own interpretation of Hindu mythology and legends. The article goes on to state, Hindu mythology holds that the deity Vishnu descends to earth as an avatar, a form, whenever the cosmic order is disturbed. Vishnu first descended as a fish, then as a tortoise, a boar, a half man, half lion, a dwarf, as a warrior god, and finally as Krishna, a preceptor. While Hindu mythology sees avatars as stages of consciousness, Hindutva jingoists interpret it as a theory of evolution that long preceded Darwin. Islamic orthodoxy also frowns on Darwinism, and countries that have banned the theory completely include Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Algeria, and Morocco. Lebanon has removed evolution from the curriculum, while in Jordan, the subject is taught within a religious framework. That would be an example of something called a theistic evolution. You'll find that in Muslim societies too, just like you find it here. A lot of Christians believe. One of the great Christian apologists of our time, William Lane Craig, is a theistic evolutionist. So really, really smart, very intelligent people somehow or another. I don't know. I'll leave it to you. You listen to this evidence and you can make up your mind for yourself. I'm a creationist. I believe what the Bible said about how this place was created, and I don't start believing the Bible after Genesis. Take it from the start. Okay, first of all, before we analyze the article, what do people in India believe? Right? Why is this coming up now? What is generally going on there? You know, here I just gave us at the top of the show an understanding of kind of how we think here. There's the Christian background, but there's kind of American. The American self is Gnostic, right? It's a vigorous zeal for independence at all costs, you know. Among the world's 3 earliest civilizations, the people of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley region sprang forth the world's major religions. From the early sun gods and nature deities to the half-man, half-animal chimeras, most of these gods were essentially variations of amplified humanity, mythological beings with mostly human attributes sharing the same shortcomings as people who worship them. In other words, human beings are, R.C. Sproul said, homo religioso. We're by our nature, we're religious. Right? Atheism is an unusual development in humanity. And so we are given to fantasy. We are given to creating gods. And typically, when man creates gods, they look a lot like man. They have a lot of man's flaws. But Hindu religion originated on the Indian subcontinent and comes from a vast core of religious oral tradition and Sanskrit written history called the Vedas. Veda means knowledge. So the knowledge. And the Vedas cover a wide range of topics, including theology, philosophy, ethics, social customs. Some of the texts and practices, some of the Vedas date to the 2nd century, back to the 2nd millennium before Christ, or possibly earlier. But from about the 4th century AD, after Christ, or what we call the Common Era now, from about the 4th century, that would be the 300s, Hinduism had a dominant presence in the Indus Valley, and by the 21st century, Hinduism had nearly 1 billion adherents worldwide. Today, it is the religion of about 80% of India's population. The Vedas have had a profound influence on Hinduism and on Indian culture. It shaped everything from their religious practices to their art and their literature. One of the thing about the Vedas is tensions. There are characteristic tensions in the Vedic texts. One of those characteristic tensions deals specifically with an individual's deep bonds to family, society, right? And obviously also the divinities associated with those concepts. But so there's a sense of family and society there, which of course we can see that the education system in India, the ones who are crying out here, they a lot like the rest of the world, they don't care very much about the family. Hinduism has many creation myths. The Rig Veda describes the creation of humans, saying that the first humans were created by the god Brahma, who is known as creator of the universe. But not really, right? Because Brahma created humans from his own body, and they were said to have originally been androgynous beings before being separated into male and female. So there's your interesting, right? Another account from the Rig Veda says, in the beginning there was only chaos and darkness, and the god Prajapati emerged from the chaos as the first being, and then he created the universe by performing a cosmic sacrifice. So the God emerged from the chaos, right? The chaos, that suggests there's something there to be in chaos as the very first being, and then he created the universe by performing a cosmic sacrifice in which he just divided himself into multiple parts and created the earth, the sky, and other elements of the universe. So this is the creation myth. But overall, the creation myth of Hinduism is complex and multifaceted, and there are many versions and interpretations just depending on the specific Hindu tradition or school of thought. So that's where we are. That sets us up. The article comes from that context, right? These school children have been exposed to Hinduism, and quite a lot of Indian society has been exposed to Christianity through missionary work. Right? So let's go ahead and analyze this article and go through it bit by bit. So by the end of this show, you will be very comfortable in responding to anyone who wants to suggest that we evolved from apes, or anyone who wants to give you a hard time for not believing it. You'll have some tools to combat that with. My friends, welcome to the show. Once again, this is Armor of Truth Live number 236. And let me tell you, we're glad to have you with us again for another episode of our flagship show. Let me ask you a question. Have you had enough yet? Are you tired of seeing the liberal so-called progressives and their woke agenda of pure lies? Are you tired of seeing that dominate the media? You tired of seeing that agenda cut you out of the conversation? Well, faith is resistance, and you are the resistance today. We've had enough too. And we're committed to growing Armor of Truth into a real media force for Christ. But we're still a struggling little startup trying to establish our unique media ministry in a world where it's hostile. We're in competition on YouTube with channels that have like 300,000, 500,000, over 1 million subscribers who offer vapid musings about nothing. Right? And they're putting our people to sleep. So we're running out of time to make our mark and establish Armor of Truth as a force to be reckoned with. Look, we love Jesus Christ, and we love this work. When I say we, I'm talking about myself and my wife, Summer, and our other officer. We love this work, and we think it's meaningful, and we need your support if we're going to make it to 2024. So let me tell you how we can take back the internet and do it together. If you've watched Armor of Truth Live before and we've earned your trust, then please, right now, just consider right now taking a moment to tap that thumbs up on your YouTube app or wherever you happen to be watching on the icon. Just tap that thumbs up. You don't understand how important that is. I didn't for a long time. Give this video a like. It's completely free to do it, and it takes about 5 seconds. I know it doesn't sound like much, but I assure you, the more likes we receive from you, the better chance this video has of being circulated on the platform. That's just how it works. If we get likes and comments and engagement, this video will show up in front of more people who've not yet heard of us. Even when the content is controversial, let me make this clear. Even when the content is controversial, videos that get a lot of engagement from the viewers get more views. Now, they might not get as many as the top, but you get more with engagement, period. That's how this works. It does us no good to assume that we're just going to be mitigated, shadow banned, and shut out of the conversation when we can see other Christian voices making an impact out here. But we cannot do it without you. That's how this works. Grassroots support still works. And my friends, the time is now. We have to work together and really try hard to make our mark here while we can. Otherwise we won't survive, and we can't do it without you and your prayers and your support. So you can help us out a great deal just by hitting the like button. Just hit that thumbs up. Leave a comment under the video. That also helps out a lot. And it's completely free. None of that costs you anything. So if you will, join with us and help Armor of Truth to grow so that we can influence many more folks who do not know Christ and they don't know what to think about this world. They don't know what to think about Darwinism. They don't know what to think about the totalitarian takeover of America and the free world. So help us to overcome the screeching mob of the new woke order. Because as you help us, as we grow, we're able to expand our work, and we can be in more places and make it easier for other people to find our work. And on that note, folks, please, we want to invite you. We want to encourage you. We want to implore you. We demand you. Joking. Please, folks, go to wherever you get your apps and download the brand spanking new Armor of Truth mobile app. Right? We have a new video up there now. You'll find it in the AOT Presents section on the app. And it's called Give It to God. It's a produced video that we made. You've heard someone say, well, you're having anxiety. Well, just give it to God. You're having some troubles. Things are going on. Just give it to God. Well, what in the world does that mean? How do I give it to God? Well, there's a video now there to help you out with that. Go to the Armor of Truth mobile app, download it, set your notifications however you like it, and you can see this content. We've also got 3 episodes now of Growing Pains in the Faith, and that is a Bible study in the book of James. 4th episode coming out momentarily. And you can now easily sign up for the Armor of Truth newsletter in one tap. But here's the most important reason why you should download the Armor of Truth mobile app today. Notifications. That is the big point here. Download the app. Set up your notifications however you like. But if you would allow notifications, then that makes it so that we can send out alerts to you directly to your phone or your device anytime when we're going live. Maybe we won't be going live on YouTube. Maybe we'll be going live on Odyssey or some other platform, maybe our website. Down the line when we're on streaming, when we're on a other streaming platform, we can let you know wherever we are. All right, and we can let you know when new podcasts are dropping. So the main thing to understand is that when you download this app and you see us here on YouTube and you see a video pop up and it says we're going to be coming on, that notification will tell you when we're coming live. Now, I apologize. You didn't get a notification tonight. That's on me. I forgot. Summer she reminded me, but I just dropped the ball. I didn't do it. I forgot about that. But Lord willing that I don't forget. That's the first time. We'll pray it's the last that I forget that. But normally, you'll receive a notification when we go live here, wherever we are, or when we put out new articles. Summer is constantly updating the Culture Vault at armoroftruth.net. So please download the new Armor of Truth mobile app. Set up your notifications however you like them. This is 100% free. Doesn't cost you anything to do it. And look, we thank you all for your support and your prayers and helping us to grow and serve God through our unique media ministry. So if you'd like to support us with a donation or just even a small tip to say thanks, you can tap the give option on the app, or you can go to armoroftruth.net/donate or donations. And there's all kinds of links under this video as well. Cash App is $AOT men as well. We are grateful, very grateful to now have everything we need to serve you the best. So now that we're established, it's time to grow. So if you would, download the mobile app, like the video, share the video, leave comments, engage with us. Tell us that you like what you're seeing. Tell us that you don't like what we're saying, whichever. That's all good too. We're just happy to be able to produce our own high quality, uncensored work and make it instantly available to anyone who has the Armor of Truth mobile app. And I'd like to give a special shout out right quick here to Joe Powell. Joe has been extremely supportive of us, and I just want to say thank you to Joe. He sent a message earlier, and Summer shared it with me, and he was asking about lying. Right? Everybody's lying. You turn on the TV, and everybody's lying. I can read this here. Yeah, Joe's asking about, he says, he just wants a little comment about this, some Bible foundation here. It's so prevalent in politics. Everyone's lying. People calling out lies. It's just, someone will definitely lie and then another person will call it out. Nothing ever happens. People don't go to jail. No one's being held accountable for anything. Joe says, I rarely lie, but I thought that's not that bad. Sometimes we lie to make people happy because the truth might offend or hurt someone's feelings. Now, since Trump left office, we have what I call the major three lies: transgenderism, the border, the war in Ukraine. The media, politicians continuously lie about these subjects. Joe says, refers to the commandments. He was wondering, what are the consequences for this sin? Lying and deception seems to be built into our society through popular culture. Also with the show Catfish on MTV, right? It's all about lying. Everyone's lying. He also talks about the pandemic that happened in the doctors and medical establishment. Just flat lied, didn't they? Joe says, it makes me mad. You know, even having faith in the Lord, it makes me mad to see people lying. And when people lie to my face through the media or whatever, So, Proverbs 12:22 says, the Lord detests lying lips. That's one. And then it says, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. So that's how we think. In our worldview, that's where we don't lie. We have to tell the truth. As Christians, we don't have the option of breaking the rules. They do. They can break the rules all they want. We don't have that option. But we have the Lord. This verse here, Proverbs 12:22, is emphasizing the importance of honesty and integrity, right? Joe, that's what we are in the world. We're here to cure that. That's why it's important that we spread this around as much as possible. We are salt and light. And just basically all that means is our presence in the world, it's not us, but it's the Holy Spirit that lives in us. And so our presence in the world as salt, it's a disinfectant. And anything that's good, salt will preserve. And light, of course, that's pretty clear, right? Light exposes evil, and light also exposes the truth so people can find their way. You know, the light on the path. The lying goes against God's values, certainly. It goes against his nature. Lying is condemned as a sin for a reason. It's just as bad as any other. And the consequences for that sin, for those sins, if you're not in Christ, it's judgment, right? Everyone's going to die. That's what we get in this life. Scriptures tell us that every person's going to die, and then comes the judgment. All right, and there's one of two things will happen when you die. You will stand there on your own merit, and you'll tell God why you're not in Christ. You'll tell God why. You'll give him all of your excuses as to why you think you didn't have enough information. to follow God, or you didn't think his word was true, or maybe you were a follower. Many will come to me at that time and say, Lord, Lord, did we not do this and do that and do all these things in your name? Maybe you think you are a Christian, but you're not. One of two things will happen at that day. You'll stand there and you'll answer for your sins, or no judgment. You'll receive mercy from God, because everyone's broken his law. No one is righteous. There are none who are righteous. There are none who seek for God. That's what the scriptures tell us. So if you have a desire to seek after God, he put that in you. That's a gift. Ephesians 4:25, therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, because we're all members of one body. But the big one is this, John 3:16, right there's the good news. For God so loved the world, he gave his only Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe is condemned already. And so that's the point. Whoever does not believe is condemned already. In the name, it says, because he has not believed in the name of the only Son of God. But verse 19 is interesting. It goes on and says, and this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people love darkness rather than light. That's why they lie, Joe. Because men love darkness rather than light. Why? Because their deeds are evil, and they know their deeds are evil. Verse 20 says, everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works be exposed. So those who do evil don't come to the light. They try to keep everything in the dark because they don't want to be exposed. And think of the arrogance. What Joe is saying is true. The arrogance in people, in a lot of leaders today. As Joe says, to just lie to you, thinking that there's no consequence. Verse 21 says, but whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God. So when we screw up, a Christian comes to the light. He confesses and then repents. That's what we don't see. And that's why our society, that's why our country is collapsing, for those reasons. So thanks to Joe for that question, and thanks for your support, brother. We really appreciate you. We're really grateful and humbled by your support. All right, so who is Charles Darwin and what is Darwinism? Well, we can do the analysis. I want you to understand who is this Darwin character. Charles Darwin was an English naturalist and biologist who lived from 1809 to 1882. Now, Darwin is best known for his theory of evolution by natural selection. Surprise, surprise. And it revolutionized the way scientists and the general public viewed the origins of life on Earth. So right as we get started here, make sure you understand. Some people will say, yeah, but Darwinism doesn't really have anything to say about where we came from or about how the universe began. No, it does. The title of his book is On the Origin of Species. That means that and this is mechanistic, so it wants to break everything down into its little individual parts and follow it back to the start. And so that means, yes, definitely Darwinism is all about origins. Darwin was born in Shrewsbury, England, into a wealthy family with a long history of scientific achievement. Young Charles showed a zeal for the natural world. From an early age, he was collecting a wide variety of specimens, everything from beetles to bird eggs. So he loved science right from the start. He loved the natural world. He loved biology. Now, in 1831, after matriculation at Cambridge University, a 20-something Charles Darwin embarked on a 5-year journey aboard a ship called the HMS Beagle. It was a relatively small ship at around 90 feet stem to stern. The Beagle was built for the purpose of conducting hydrographic surveys of the coastlines, specifically of South America and its nearby islands. But this was the Victorian era. And after all, the Beagle was a warship. The Beagle was a Cherokee-class 10-gun brig sloop, to be specific, of the Royal Navy, at a time when the British Empire ruled the high seas, right? There's some gravitas for you. The Beagle was no bucket. She carried a crew of 70 men, including officers, sailors, and a number of scientists. Now, the ship didn't see much action early on, but the proud Beagle was called upon to represent the Royal Navy in celebrations of the coronation of King George IV. The ship was adapted as a survey bark, rigged and outfitted for adventure, and eventually did take part in 3 survey expeditions. And so a recently graduated naturalist, as a recent graduate, Charles Darwin was aboard the second voyage of the Beagle. It had 3 big voyages, and Darwin was on the second one. During the now famous voyage, Darwin sailed across 3 major oceans of the world. There's a look inside the Beagle. You know, for its time, that's state of the art. I mean, Darwin was really, this was the best way to travel, most sophisticated way to travel. You know, unless you're on Titanic or something like that, but that was dangerous. You're not going down on this thing. This thing was built for everything. This is what Darwin's journey looked like. During the journey, Darwin sailed across 3 major oceans of the world in 5 years' time. Beagle sailed across the Atlantic Ocean twice, once going out down to the tip of South America there. You see the number 4. And then a second crossing back to England from Australia. You see they come down and go around the tip of South America. Go out to number 11, that's Tahiti, right? And I guess if you're dealing with a flat earth model, I don't know how Darwin got from 11 to 12. It's a mystery, right? Well, anyway, somehow or another, by magic or some other way, he ends up over here, at number 12 there. New Zealand. Then Australia, Hobart, up into the Indian Ocean. And down to it's interesting because as far as Africa, on Darwin's journey, he didn't see a lot of Africa. Most of his work was done on the coastlines of South America, because that's where the Beagle was commissioned to be. There were other ships commissioned to be in Africa, but you just think about this. Darwin had to commit himself to 5 years. This was a 5-year journey. He was gone for 5 years. So toward the end of the voyage, the Beagle also spent some time in the Indian Ocean, including a visit to the island of Mauritius. But the majority of the voyage was spent exploring the Pacific Ocean, including visits to the Galapagos Islands, Tahiti, New Zealand, and Australia. Now, the very important Galapagos Islands, if you see number 10 on your map there, that is the Galapagos Islands. We'll talk more about that in just a second. Now, so whenever the Beagle was docked There's the Galapagos Islands. Whenever the Beagle was docked or anchored in one of the many diverse locations, Darwin then had the opportunity to go ashore, where that's where he did most of his research. He researched geology, natural history, and ethnology, and he made observations. He could make some observations from the deck of the ship, but when they were in dock or anchored, that's when he was able to get specimens. Most of his time, though, was spent on the ship cataloging specimens and making detailed observations of the flora and the fauna that he gathered, that he or encountered. The voyage of the HMS Beagle is widely regarded as one of the most important scientific expeditions in history. Darwin became famous from this journey when he published his diary journal, and it's known as the Voyage of the Beagle. And it was his journal, and it contained the findings within that played a pivotal role in the formation of his theories. Specifically, it was the Galapagos Islands and South America. That played the most significant role in Darwin's work and the development of his theory of evolution by natural selection. And this is what the Galapagos Islands look like. It's a very beautiful place. The Galapagos Islands are about 1,000 kilometers off the northwest coast of the South American continent. There are 19 islands. There you can see a crater. That's a crater in the water there. 19 islands. And they're very unique due to the variety of geographical features and marine species that are available there for study. These islands, the Galapagos Islands, have been called a living museum and a showcase for evolution. The islands are situated at the confluence of 3 ocean currents. And the islands also experience just constant seismic and volcanic activity. All of these unique processes and the extreme isolation of the Galapagos Islands have allowed for the development of unusual animal life, such as the land iguana, the giant tortoise, and many types of birds. Lots of birds. Now, this is where the story begins for evolution, with the birds. Darwin's finches, right? There's Galapagos finches are what inspired Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. He visited the Galapagos Islands in 1835, and these are some of his drawings. This voyage was considered to be one of the most important expeditions of the 19th century. As for the Beagle, let's not forget about the Beagle. Let's visit one more time. As for the old venerable Beagle, well, she was eventually decommissioned and broken up for scrap in 1870. But hey, that was a pretty good career, right? She was known for Charles Darwin. Darwin, on the other hand, was just getting started. From this voyage, Darwin wrote his seminal work titled On the Origin of Species, which was published in 1859. In it, he proposed that species evolve over time through a process of natural selection. What that means is organisms that are better adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and reproduce. Nothing too crazy about that, right? That's what you would call microevolution, right? We definitely see adaptation and changes, right? Polar bears with their white fur, is that an adaptation so that they can blend in with the snow or reflect sunlight? You know, you can guess at that if you like. But that's what the theory says. Animals that live in colder environments have thicker fur, perhaps, perhaps. But But that isn't where it stops, right? We've got this idea called macroevolution, or all the way, big, full on, all the way, in other words, the earth and the origin of the earth. Now, evolution by natural selection, or evolutionary naturalism, was a controversial theory right from the start because it challenged religious and scientific beliefs about the origins of life. In fact, Darwin's theory says, here's the truth, right? It made claims about the origins of life. It challenged religious beliefs, scientific beliefs, and challenged beliefs about the origins of life. But here's the truth. Darwin's theory says nothing at all about the origin of life because it cannot. It cannot say anything about the origin of life. The origin of life, that is a metaphysical concept. The best that Darwin's theory can ever give us regarding origins is the inspiration of far too many overzealous, scientific, atheistic materialists is to assert that life has sprung up from non-life. Right? Abiogenesis, that the first life forms woke up. They came to life from inorganic matter, which is the same as saying that life sprang forth from a rock. Worse yet, and I don't blame Darwin for this. I don't think he ever set out to be the prophet of a new religion, but Darwinism has even inspired the most imaginative of religious atheists to make the completely asinine metaphysical claim that the universe created itself. What's even more ridiculous is that the universe is eternal. Both of those claims are ridiculous. Saying that the universe created itself violates the law of non-contradiction. How can a thing create itself if it doesn't exist to create itself? A thing can't be like I'm not going to get into the logic, symbolic logic right now. We'll save that for later. But these are right. If you throw God out the window, well, you haven't saved yourself any trouble. It doesn't matter to them that no one has ever observed anything creating itself or just popping into existence ex nihilo. Nor do they seem to be bothered by the fact that such an assertion violates, as we've already said, the laws of logic that they depend on to do their work, right? When you have scientists who depend on the laws of logic to make good inferences and to do good science and make good observations and come up with hypotheses and write up reports, they use the laws of logic. Well, those same laws of logic that they depend on, they just throw those out the window when they make claims about eternal universes. Do you want to know? Are you asking yourself, why is an eternal universe? Why is that irrational? Because if the universe was eternal, everything would be dead by now. Right? That makes sense. It can't be eternal. Nothing material can be eternal. Everything material is created. Period. Here's the famous explanation. If there was a room, you have a room that's been sealed off forever. It's a thought experiment. It's not possible, but it's just a thought experiment because this is, right? It's no more possible to seal a room off forever than it is to have an eternal universe. But it's a thought experiment. You go into a room that's been sealed forever. You open the door and walk in, and you're the first person to ever see inside this room. And what you find inside that room is a candle burned halfway down and a warm cup of coffee. What does that tell you? That room is not eternal. Somebody put those things there. That is the nature of the universe that we see around us. Somebody put those things there. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. This would all be dead. Perhaps we can gain some insight into the underlying problems of Darwinism if we take a look at his book, specifically the title. Let's take a look at this. How does this help us, right? How does looking at the title of his book help us? Shouldn't you look on the inside and read the pages? Well, yes, we've done that too, but we don't have time to read the book here tonight. Let's just look at the title. We don't have to go much further than that. Published in 1859, Darwin's most famous work, commonly known as On the Origin of Species. However, that's not the title Darwin gave it. You can see it right there. The full title is On the Origin of Species. By means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Okay, go ahead, talk amongst yourselves. Anything unusual? Anything of note there? I think that preservation of favored races point there is going to be a little bit of that's going to be a point of contention. So right off the bat, Darwin's theory, Darwinianism, remember from the article? Right, this is the thing that if we don't have it, we can't even understand who we are. It's fundamental to our understanding of the world. Okay. Well, the book presents Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection and provided a wealth of evidence and arguments in support of his revolutionary idea. And the book was hugely influential in the scientific community and beyond. And its impact on our understanding of the natural world and our place in it continues to be felt to this day. And it has certainly been felt. By whom? Preservation of favored races. Okay, well maybe that sounds a little racist. Right? How many people promoting this transgender ideology out there, calling other people racist, and their whole worldview is founded right here. Right here. It's just harmless, right? It's just harmless. It's no big deal. It's just a book, right? Atheists and materialists, they're not hurting anybody, are they? This, my friends, is where our current troubles, technocracy, scientific dictatorship, this is where it originates. What Darwin does, or what Darwinianism does, is it lays the foundation for scientific control of the masses. How? I'll explain that shortly. But suffice it to say that the theory of evolution by natural selection, as it comes on the heels of the Enlightenment, where science and religion were parted in the name of reason, with Hegel's dialectic more popular than ever. So Hegel is in the air. It's a perfect storm of scientific progress and godless humanism. And it was all gathering on the horizon. And this storm was ready to hit in the 20th century. But in short, Hegel's dialectic is a philosophical method that involves the synthesis of opposing viewpoints or ideas. And it is essential to Darwinianism. So this idea of the dialectic, a thesis, exists, an idea, a way of life. And it is challenged by an antithesis or an antithesis. Another idea comes along to challenge it, and the two opposing ideas or forces push against one another, creating friction, each wearing the other down until one dominates or the two converge in a reconciliation. A new force, a new idea, a new way of life, or a synthesis that reconciles the two opposing ideas or forces. Now, Hegel was trying to explain the historical development of ideas and institutions, as well as the progress of human thought over time, how For example, Hegel, if you apply Hegel to philosophy, you have one guy, I don't know, was it Thales, whoever who thought everything was water. So he's got his idea, and then another guy comes along and says, no, it's not all water, it's this. Another guy comes along and says, no, that's not right, it's this. And so we have a thesis, we have a main idea, a prevailing attitude. Someone comes along and they friction it out, and there's a new idea that comes out of that. However, that's what Hegel was getting at. But of course, man and his mighty mind and his desire to be as God, his desire to create a human utopia, to immanentize the eschaton, to bring heaven to earth on his own terms. Now, add Hegel, add the dialectic to Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Add that, and the perfect conditions were established for these theories to combine in an unholy death march. And that's what you saw in the 20th century. Right? That storm that was brewing was Karl Marx. Karl Marx, with the financial assistance, of course, of Friedrich Engels, German philosophers, both of them, social and political theorists, who are best known for their influential ideas on communism and socialism, specifically on private property and the state, the ideas of class struggle. They also wrote heavily on the origins of the family, right? This you got to get rid of. It's all about the state. The state is the God. And of course, Marx and Engels wrote heavily about the need for a revolutionary transformation of society in order to achieve that utopia. Now you have the perfect conditions for worldwide revolutionary movements that would make the French Reign of Terror from 1793 and 1794, with its mass executions of the clergy and all political dissidents, and anyone who was perceived to be the enemy of the revolution. The 20th century makes the French Reign of Terror look like a garden party. And that is where we sit today, my friends. Our world has embraced Darwinism, and it has infected everything. Now, some might call it, but no, it's neo-Darwinism now, Brad. Don't you understand? We've applied it to all these other... Okay, Neo-Darwinism incorporates genetic inheritance. What Darwin didn't know about genetics that is known now is applied to his theory, and it's called Neo-Darwinism. It's no better. Neo-Darwinism considers genetic inheritance and genetic drift into the understanding of evolution. But the foundations of rebellion are still there. They're present. The inherent destruction of the dignity of all human beings is necessarily part of this theory. And it can be seen everywhere you look today, from vaccine mandates to abortion being championed as a fundamental right, abortion being called health care. Again, just like we said earlier, there's a satanic spirit behind it, because any person knows, whether they have the Holy Spirit or not, that the one thing mankind needs in a time of great fear and uncertainty is hope. What was one of the first things they did during the lockdowns? Shut down the churches. So the pandemic and everything to do with it, right on, including the vaccine role, it all comes from this. It all stems from this mindset, this worldview. Okay. Game over, Chuck. Game over. So this article from India, we'll go through this piece by piece. It starts out saying that that Darwin's theory is fundamental to our understanding of the biological world. First of all, folks, when people start saying you need to follow the science, right? We've got to follow the science. There is no universally accepted definition of science. Science doesn't work like that. Science is a method for getting at the truth. When you're not allowed to question the science, you're not in science anymore. The article says, in a pointed reference to the pandemic rationale given by NCR, by the people who took Darwin away from the schools, the statement has stressed the relevance of Darwin's theory today, saying the principles of natural selection help us to understand how any pandemic progresses, right? We need Darwin because that helps us understand why people get sick or how to cure people, how to cure diseases. That's what Darwinianism has done. Evolutionary naturalism saves lives, they'll say. Well, that's one of the first big claims, that Darwin is fundamental. There's a book from Del Ratch. I mean, I would encourage anybody who wants to know more about the natural sciences from a Christian perspective. What can science actually say? What can it actually do? This book is extremely helpful for that. I'll just share a couple little points from this. What you're dealing with here, he calls it methodological naturalism. Anything supernatural is prohibited. The scientific method can't tell you anything about things that are metaphysical, that are beyond the physical, because science is the physical sciences. So that right there tells us science can't tell us everything. Science can't answer all truth. But that's what scientism is. It says that the natural sciences are our whole corpus of truth. Science must proceed as if philosophical naturalism is true, whether it is or not, making no reference to supernatural design, causation, or activity in its formal scientific descriptions, explanations, and theories. And so right there, once again, the laws of logic that scientists depend on to do their work, when it's inconvenient, they forget those laws. The variety of metaphysical commitments are utterly indispensable to science itself, right? Metaphysics is extremely important for science, right? Because we have to make assumptions. We have to think up hypotheses. That's metaphysical. The mind is not a physical thing. There is no universally accepted formal definition of science, and proposed definitions almost invariably run into nasty difficulties sooner or later. Darwinianism is a commitment to, or they say, right? They'll tell you that, well, we have a commitment to following the evidence wherever it leads, right? Trust the science. Well, pushing an official policy of refusing to allow science to follow evidence when that evidence points to something supernatural, right? Then what the person has done is they're following evidence until the evidence points to something I don't like. Pushing an official policy of refusing to allow science to follow evidence to supernatural design, no matter what the evidence turns out to be. Science has often been described as organized, formalized common sense. Most cultures have considered it just good common sense that there is a supernatural realm, and that supernatural activity is deeply linked to the structure, governance, and history of the universe. It commits science to either having to deliberately ignore major, possibly even observable features of the material realm, or having to refrain from even considering the obvious and only workable explanation should it turn out that those features clearly resulted from supernatural activity. In other words, what Darwinism does, evolutionary naturalism, the philosophical underpinnings of it. It actually prevents science from reaching certain truths. Philosophical naturalism, right? We're talking about evolutionary naturalism, which is the way they go about biology. But philosophical naturalism, when they say God doesn't exist because I don't see him and I can't test him in a test tube, they're preventing science from reaching certain truths. That's essentially what that is doing for you. So, again, the claim here is that the principles of natural selection help us understand how pandemics progress, and that it's fundamental for understanding the world altogether. There is no doubt that the biblical vision of man as God's creature, whom he made in his own image, that has had the most powerful effect on human dignity, on liberty, on the expansion of the rights of the individual. Think about that. Everyone in the streets saying, I need my rights, I want my rights, while they've turned their back on the one who gave them human rights. That's what the Declaration of Independence says. It says that human rights are given by God, and that if there is a government, its duty is to secure those human rights. The biblical vision of man, biblical anthropology, at man as God's creature, whom God made in his own image, has had the most powerful effect on human dignity, liberty, rights, political systems. In fact, governments exist because God has ordained that governments exist for the good. They certainly go rogue, don't they? On the development of medicine, no doubt, there is no doubt that the vision of man as God's creature, who God made in his own image, has had the most powerful effect on the development of medicine and on every other area of culture. Why would any animal who is an accident, right, who came to be because of random variations or random mutations in their genetics and natural selection, that's survival of the fittest. Why would any animal like that at all be interested in creating medicines to ease the suffering of other people? Yeah, methodological naturalism. Now, we read that part. Not only can science not validate its own foundations, right? This is the foundations of the science these folks are talking about, right? Our initial question is, are there areas within which pure science cannot directly speak? Of course, there are many. Science cannot validate either the scientific method itself or the presuppositions of that method. I'll just make it simple. It's the problem of induction. The people who are telling you that this is for the good, this is for the greater good, locking things down, those people who are doing that, and the ones that are telling you need to take this shot, who are affirming this theory as the foundation for their science, are living in a contradiction. They can't even justify the existence of their own method. I'll read what Ratch has here. Consider, for instance, the principle of the uniformity of nature. This principle does not appear to be a result of science for the simple reason that it is a presupposition employed in generating results. The uniformity of nature is simply this: hydrogen will behave today as it did yesterday. Lord willing, it will behave tomorrow as it did today. And because the elements are stable, we can make predictions about the world. Because the universe is stable, I know that I can make plans for later, for tomorrow. Without that stability, life's unlivable. So how is it stable? How are the laws of logic by which we do science? How are they stable? How do they remain stable? Why aren't they different every day? Observations and data are interpreted in the light of presupposition. Everyone has presuppositions. That interpretive role is evidenced by the protected status of the uniformity principle. When things do not go as demanded by our latest theories, we do not conclude that nature has changed the rules since yesterday. Rather, we conclude that our theories were off somewhere. Not only can science not validate its own foundations, but if we do accept science, including its foundations, there must be some other sort of grounds for accepting at least some beliefs. This implies that science cannot be the only legitimate basis for believing in something. Those who claim either that science is competent for dealing with all matters, scientism, or that science is the only legitimate method for dealing with any matter, these people are seriously confused. It's just that simple. Now, back to the article. One of the scientists from the Department of Science and Technology said, made the claim, he said, otherwise, we should be about communicating, science should be about communicating key concepts about the world through modern science. He said, otherwise we'll be living with 14th century perceptions that can generate friction and lead to violence. Now, this was the claim that really got my attention. So what this person is claiming is that without Darwinism in our schools, friction will occur and violence will break out. Okay? So let's deal with that. What is the truth about this? I want you, don't miss the basic lack of awareness in this comment. Without Darwinism, violence will break out. People won't know how to behave. This is exactly what indoctrination looks like, my friends. When someone believes a lie and promotes it as true. Joe Powell, right? What Joe wrote in to ask us about the lie. This is what it looks like. Now, this person is either lying or they're just ignorant of the truth. This scientist, with an amazing lack of self-awareness, with an amazing display of a lack of common sense, made a public statement on behalf of science and public safety saying, without Darwin, we'll be stuck in the past and people will get hurt. Now that is truly bird-brained. Right? I'm not saying that his brain evolved from a bird, but I am saying that that is a bird-brained thing to say. Here's the truth. The evidence is so overwhelming that it's simply a matter of fact at this point. Charles Darwin was a racist. We might not get to him tonight, but there are articles here I'll share with you. Charles Darwin was, without a doubt, a man who was a racist. Let's see if I can get that one for you right quick. At least that one, right? Yeah. Darwin's early evolutionary theory fueled discrimination, right? Have you heard of eugenics? Yeah, that's Darwin. Race-based discrimination has multiple sources, many of which precede Darwin, but evolutionary theory gave a powerful push to a scientific version of racism that still impacts us today. Now, this is about Darwin's book, The Descent of Man. It depicted Africans as less evolved than white people. The mainstream scientific community in Europe and the United States accepted that characterization and used it to promote racial discrimination. David Klinghoffer says, for generations, American public school children learned from their biology textbooks the pseudoscience that Caucasians were more advanced on the evolutionary ladder than Africans. Okay? This is Darwinism. All right, and what was the comment? Right, without this theory in our schools, violence will break out. Without this theory in our schools, violence might break out. You see how ridiculous. I mean, how sadly mistaken this is. It's unbelievable. Darwin was a racist. There's no question about that. And the premises of Darwinism enabled the Marxist totalitarian states in the 20th century to conveniently liquidate, to purge, dispatch, to murder millions of their citizens because there is no God. People are not made in God's image because there is no God. There's no transcendent creator. There's nothing to give those citizens dignity and a right to exist beyond what the state says. Now that is stateism. That's when the state is God. Whenever you have stateism, you have scientism informing it. This point has been explored at length by Baron Erich von Kuhnelt-Leddihn of Austria, who is possibly the greatest scholar on questions of liberty and totalitarianism. In his 1990 book titled Leftism Revisited, From the Marquis de Sade to Marx to Hitler and Pol Pot, he shows that apart from the belief, by the way, those names, Marx, Hitler, Pol Pot, we don't even have Stalin. You throw Stalin in there with it, you've got probably about 180 million dead people in the 20th century. And they all, at the hand, this is why. Darwinism is why those people died, right? Because this class is better. These people need to be liquidated. Why shouldn't we do it? There's no reason to not do it. The Baron here, anyway, in his book, shows that apart from the belief that mankind is created in the image of a transcendent God, the divinely derived dignity and liberty of human beings disappears. Because the genuine materialist, for the genuine materialist, there is no fundamental standard, right? There is only gradual evolutionary difference between a man and a pest, between a man and a noxious insect. His research demonstrates that, quote, the issue is between man created in the image of God and the termite in a human mask. He shows what evolutionary views mean when applied to the concepts and practice of laws. You see, that's where the problem is. Darwinian theory, evolutionary naturalism, has been applied to the practice of law. So you see the assertion made here by those who demand the pseudoscience of Darwinism is exactly the opposite of truth. Get that right, Joe Powell. Darwin's theory of favored races is at the root of the cause of class struggles and violence, not the other way around. And the so-called scientist here who made the claim, we're going to have violence, ignorantly proclaims that to be true. There is so much more at stake here than just biology. It is precisely because the debate moves invariably from the merely biological arena into the area of morality is why it has engendered intense emotional commitments. So how we choose to answer the question of whether or not we are created answers a larger question of who is really in charge here and whose rules should we honor. Should we honor the Ten Commandments given by God, or should we honor human theories because they're favored by 51% majority? Or should we honor human theories because they're enforced by a ruling class who controls 51% of the majority? So the question of origins is more than a debate about science textbooks. It is central to our day-to-day existence, and it's a matter of life and death. So that science has got it absolutely upside down and wrong. The Bible is God's revelation of His Word to us, and it includes all we need to know concerning Him, concerning salvation, and how we shall live and love in a fallen world. Right? Let's think about the Bible. Think about Genesis 1. In the beginning, God. God chose to begin His divine revelation to us with a description of creation, demonstrating that it is not only primal in the historical sense, but it is primary for the understanding of all other doctrines as well. That's where it starts. In the beginning, God created. Origin is our first concern because it tells us to whom we belong. It tells us who we are and who God is, who we're not. Certainly, we would expect, would we not expect Satan, the father of lies and the author of confusion, to muddy the waters on these points? Would we not expect Satan to establish a counterfeit origin account? Sure we would. The article goes on to talk about the Human Genome Project. They say that the Human Genome Project has shown that humankind is one. That evolutionary naturalism pulls the rug out from under the divisive ideas of race and caste. I tell you, folks, that couldn't be further from the truth. That is not true. Let's think about Margaret Sanger for a minute. Matriarch of abortion mills. Now, I have some... Sanger believes she was working in accord with the universal law of evolution. She maintained that the brains of Australian Aborigines were only one step more evolved than chimpanzees and just under blacks, Jews, and Italians. That from The Pivot of Civilization, written by Margaret Sanger. She says, the lower down in the scale of human development we go, the less sexual control we find. It is said the Aboriginal Australian, the lowest known species of the human family, just a step higher than the chimpanzee brain development, has so little sexual control that police authority alone prevents him from obtaining sexual satisfaction on the streets, said Margaret Sanger. Sanger once addressed the women's branch of the Ku Klux Klan in Silver Lake, New Jersey, and received a dozen invitations to speak to similar groups. Sanger also worked hard to spread her eugenic ideas about human weeds to the rest of the world. Now, I have more on Sanger, but in the interest of time, we've got videos here about her and eugenics, Darwinism, folks. The truth has to be said, right? The Human Genome Project has done no such thing. The Human Genome Project has done nothing to end racism, right? Because at the core of all of your worldview lies this set of lies. Objections to the theory of evolution, for example, by the ruling pro-Hindu Bharatiya Janata Party, were made known in 2018. So remember the objections. Nobody, including our ancestors, in writing or orally, has said they have seen an ape turning into a man. So there are people speaking out on this. He says Darwin's theory is scientifically wrong. It needs to change. It needs to be out of the schools. And I agree. Darwinian evolution is not supported by scientific evidence. You will hear that said. You will hear it said. I asked ChatGPT earlier just to get an idea. What is give me a definition of Darwinism in less than 100 words. And it couldn't help but tell me that it's supported by confirmed by scientific evidence. So ChatGPT is no better than your average college professor. But here's the good news. Today, the theory of evolution is facing serious problems. First of all, a shift has occurred in the biological sciences as a whole regarding how scientists view and study living organisms. For most of the 20th century, the way scientists looked at biology was a mechanistic view, mechanistic concepts. For example, the blind watchmaker model, Richard Dawkins has made this popular, is a mechanistic concept. And by the way, a mechanistic concept, the blind watchmaker, that is the linchpin of Darwinism. If you can show that a mechanistic view of biology is false, if you can show the blind watchmaker model to be false, then you refute Darwinism. The major premises are these. There is no such thing as conscious or deliberate design. Everything is random, by chance. Living organisms are viewed as complex machines made up of discrete parts that interact according to well-defined rules. The emergence of biological life forms is a purely naturalistic and mechanistic process of trial and error, where natural selection acts on random variations, right? So again, folks, it comes back down to chance. That's at the heart of this religion. At the heart of the religion that the WHO and the WEF, the Biden administration, and whoever else, this is at the foundation, that chance is somehow a creator. They say physical and chemical processes with material and naturalistic causes only are observed as the roles of genes and other molecular components are emphasized in determining an organism's traits and behaviors and what those successful variations that are passed on will be. So this is reductionism, an approach to science which seeks to explain complex phenomena in terms of simpler, more fundamental components. And all non-physical phenomena or explanations are anathema, excommunicated. They're not allowed. They're damned. Natural selection or evolutionary adaptation assumes that all traits and structures have an adaptive function. So here is, if you want to get technical, here's where evolution falls apart. Darwin's theory. Because there is a vast non-adaptive order that's present throughout the plant and animal kingdoms. That suggests that Darwinism has been weighed and found wanting, right? Because random variation and natural selection are not the only game in town. Richard Dawkins, that was his quote. Naturalism, Darwinianism is the only game in... No, it's not the only game in town. Mechanistic concepts are not the only game in town. There are, when you look at plant life and animal life around the world, there are deep homologies. There are abstract patterns found throughout plants and animals which cannot be explained by Darwinian adaptation. This means, let me be clear, non-adaptive order refers to patterns or structures in organisms that don't have a clear adaptive function. Something about the way they're made, something about their phenotype, the way they look and appear, that doesn't really have an adaptive function, or their genotype. Some examples would include similarities in structure or development of organisms. Let's see, like the genetic code and developmental pathways for eyes, for how eyes are made. It's very similar in a wide range of animals, from insects to mammals, even though they have very different lifestyles and ecological roles. Genetic changes that they're genetic changes that don't affect the organism's fitness for survival and don't have an adaptive function. Structures in organisms that have apparently lost their original function. Vestigial organs, for example. The wings of flightless birds, such as ostriches and emus. Structures or traits that arise as byproducts of other adaptive changes rather than through direct selection, right? Darwin's theory is direct selection. For example, the shape of an organism's nose may be determined by other adaptations, such as the shape of the skull, rather than being directly selected for its function. Overall, non-adaptive order represents a major challenge for natural selections. So, if the search for truth in science is legitimate, right? If these people are interested in following the evidence, then when a better theory or a better method with greater explanatory power appears, then scientists, instructors, and writers and reporters, they must shift. They have to change their perspective and go with the evidence. During the 20th century, there has been a shift away from this mechanistic, reductionist concept toward informatic concepts, information. Rather than mechanistic parts, now scientists are looking at information. Informatic concepts suggest that there may be other factors beyond random variation and natural selection that contribute to the evolution of biological complexity. So these factors include something like emergent properties like, for instance, the mind or DNA, which cannot be fully accounted for by Darwinian evolution. Darwinism can't help you when it comes to understanding why does DNA exist in the first place. DNA could not be constructed by random mutation, not in 1 trillion years. This is the old thing where, like a tornado in a junkyard, right? Would you expect a tornado going through a junkyard? Let's just say all the parts of a plane were there in the junkyard. Could a tornado go through there, whip everything up, and create a fully functional 747? Obviously, no. But that's what Darwinian evolution says, is that through all of these components in the earth, through random mutation, DNA was created. No, not any more than a tornado is going to build a 747 out of parts laying on the ground. So the shift away from mechanistic concepts in biology towards information concepts has led many scientists to reevaluate the role of natural selection in shaping the complexity and diversity of life. And now many scientists are considering alternative explanations to Darwinism. One of the most strikingly irrational results of mechanistic reductionist explanations is the process of, we talked about it earlier, abiogenesis, the theory that life arose from non-living matter. Does this sound crazy? We've got all of this evidence. We've got Sanger, and we've got the racism of Darwin, and we've got people saying that life comes from non-life. How far will people go to get away from God? One line of evidence comes from experiments that simulate the conditions of early Earth. And I get a load of this. For example, the famous Miller-Urey experiment of the 1950s. What they did was they put all these components together and they got them in a container. It demonstrated that amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, could be synthesized from a mixture of simple gases and electrical sparks, which mimicked the conditions of the early Earth's atmosphere. Right? So what we've done is we got a terrarium. We got a big, and we sealed it off, and we put everything in there. Everything that could make proteins. So what is it? Yeah, the Miller-Urey experiment demonstrated that amino acids could be synthesized from simple gases. So we're making amino acids. So their theory is that in the primeval times, that these components, these gases, these simple gases, made amino acids when they were hit by lightning, for example. Okay? And that's how amino acids are formed. And when amino acids are formed, then we have the building blocks of proteins. And we have proteins, right? Then we're getting to organisms. Here's a simple question. Where did the simple gases come from that you put into your experiment? Did you form those out of nothing? Another line of evidence comes from the study of extremophiles, organisms that live in extreme environments such as hot springs, deep sea, hypothermal vents, and acidic or alkaline environments. It's live in inhospitable environments. Things can live there. By studying the adaptations of these organisms, scientists have gained insights into how life may have evolved under harsh conditions on the early Earth. This is nothing about origins, folks. Astrobiology, recent studies suggest that the building blocks of life, such as amino acids and nucleotides, may have been delivered from comets. Probably came to Earth on comets or asteroids, and interstellar dust landed on the Earth, and there are the raw materials necessary for life to emerge. Here's the truth, folks. Life couldn't emerge from that in 1 trillion years. There's not enough time. If you're interested in this, look up Professor or Dr. James Tour, T-O-U-R, on YouTube. Now listen to him. He is a molecular biologist, and he will tell you why this is nonsense. None of these experiments have ever resulted in anything remotely close to the creation of living organisms, not even for a millisecond. But funding for such adventures is apparently quite healthy today. So they keep making their claims. Darwinism is widely supported across the world. So we should trust it because a lot of people follow it, right? That's another argument. So here's what they'll always say. Anytime you reference God, Christian, listen up. You can't be a scientist and believe in God. Anytime you reference faith in God and His Word, immediately you're outside the realm of natural science. Here in this house, we trust the science. In our house, Black Lives Matter, love is love, and science is real, or whatever. So when we talk about God, we can't talk about science. We're not allowed. We're relegated to a severely restricted sort of religious discourse, and we're disconnected from, or even not allowed. Right? Scientific or religious belief is not scientific, is the claim here. Well, again, Dale Ratch's book, Science and Its Limits, gives us plenty. Just a couple. One of the main challenges, religious belief is not scientific, right? Well, what do you mean by scientific, right? There is no universal definition of science. So what do you mean when you say you're following the science? What do you mean when you say belief in God is not scientific? Well, let's suppose religious belief is not scientific. Why is that an objection? presumably because it is presupposed that anything not scientific is suspect, unreasonable, false, or the like. But why accept that as a presupposition for anything? Is the belief that I exist scientific? If you want to take on an atheist who tells you that God doesn't exist, you can just ask the atheist, prove to me that you exist. And then as they try to prove to you that they exist with all their claims, you can just tell them that evidence isn't compelling. I don't believe it. Because that's what they do. So the idea that religious belief is not scientific is, of course, the idea that anything not scientific is suspect undercuts itself. The principle is a philosophical, not a scientific principle, and consequently declares itself to be illegitimate. What about religious belief is not provable? Well, that presupposes that beliefs that are unprovable are less than first class. We shouldn't trust something that's unprovable. What is a proof? What do you mean by proof? Another objection is religious belief is unsupported by evidence. Again, what do you mean by evidence? We have to look more closely between the relationship between theories and evidence. The truth is, folks, without faith, one can't fully or rightly perceive reality to begin with. Right? Without faith, one can't reason their way to ultimate truth. We see it all the time. In other words, the admission of faith as necessary to understanding something of the event of creation is in no sense antithetical to the way true science operates in its own field. So that's what we're going to say. That's our position. Without faith, you can't discern reality completely, ultimately, anyway. Your view of reality is distorted apart from faith. In recent history, the greatest objection against employing any form of faith in God and His Word has arisen from secular evolutionists. Any sort of reference to God, supernatural causation, and faith, they argue, takes one outside the boundaries of genuine science and into the land of imagination and mythology. Only naturalistic evolution can honestly claim to be science. Everything else is faith, ignorance, or superstition. Now, as sincere as someone may be, if they say this person fails to realize that naturalistic evolution itself is a supreme act of faith. It is a religion. Right? Naturalistic evolution or evolutionary naturalism, either way, it is an act of faith. It is a religion. Philip E. Johnson, professor of law at Cal Berkeley, of all places, his specialty is the evaluation of evidences. He demonstrates this faith basis of evolution in his monograph titled Evolution as Dogma, Establishment of Naturalism. He says, quote, "What the science educators propose to teach us as evolution and label as fact is based not upon any incontrovertible empirical evidence, but it's based upon a highly controversial philosophical presupposition." Lynn Margolis, professor of biology at the University of Massachusetts, states it even more bluntly, saying that molecular biology has, as yet, been unable to demonstrate the formation of a single new species by mutations, and concludes that neo-Darwinism is a minor 20th century religious sect within the sprawling religious persuasion of Anglo-Saxon biology. That's almost worth reading again now, isn't it? Lynn Margolis, professor of biology at the University of Massachusetts, just lays it right out there. Nobody has ever shown that it's no evidence exists to show that evolutionary naturalism or naturalistic evolution or Darwinianism. No one's ever provided any evidence to show the formation of a single new species by random mutations. It doesn't exist. And therefore, she says that Neo-Darwinism it's just a minor religious sect, right? Because these are faith-based claims that they're making. Instead of the controversy over origins being between faith and science, that's what they'll say, right? We're doing science over here, you have your faith over there. Now, that's not the argument. This is not about faith and science. It's actually, the argument is the controversy is between two different kinds of faith. One faith is historic Christian faith in God and His Word and His intelligible creation. God has given us a creation that we can understand. And that gave rise to modern science. The second faith is naturalism or materialist evolutionary monism. The fact that both are faiths does not mean that they're equally valid. One begins with faith in an eternal creator God. One begins with faith in eternal matter. There is nothing in between. Every religion, whether New Age or Christianity or Judaism or Islam or materialist secularism, has to start on one of two foundations. The first assumes an eternal God behind everything that makes sense of everything else. Those who deny Him inevitably will manufacture some kind of alternative. In modern times, perhaps it will be expressed as electromagnetism or gravity or nuclear structure as lying at the root of everything. In ancient times, this alternative to God would have been something like eternal matter, of which God was merely a weak coexisting mechanic. To use the words of 4th century church father Athanasius. In Greek tragedies, for example, people scream out in pain and they curse the darkness of the universe because life doesn't make sense. Those people in the Greek tragedies they're simply being logical. They're being consistent because they're responding appropriately if matter and impersonal chance are all there is. Right? If nothing makes sense, then that response is appropriate. The modern naturalistic alternative to a creator God leads, after all, to the same depressing results as the Greek tragedies. Michael Denton he's no Christian. He's written and has shown the centrality of evolutionary faith to modern culture. He says, quote, "The entire scientific ethos and philosophy of modern Western man is based to a large extent upon the central claim of Darwinian theory, that humanity was not born by the creative intentions of a deity, but by completely mindless trial and error selection of random molecular patterns. The cultural importance of evolution theory is therefore immeasurable, forming as it does the centerpiece, the crowning achievement of the naturalistic view of the world, the final triumph of the secular thesis, which since the end of the Middle Ages has displaced the old naive cosmology of Genesis." Unquote. What does something like the theory of evolution actually do to humanity? You might ask. Is there a price to pay for living inconsistent to reason and divine truth? What are the results in the modern soul when the creator God is replaced by faceless time, chance, and energy? William Provine of Cornell University stated it clearly, quote, "The implications of modern science, however, are clearly inconsistent with most religious traditions. No inherent moral or ethical laws exist." Are you with me? Darwinism. No moral laws at all. There is no morality. Nor are there absolute guiding principles for human society. The universe cares nothing for us. We have no ultimate meaning in life. So in the article, it goes on at the bottom to say historically there's really never been a conflict between Hindu religious orthodoxy and the theory of evolution, simply because, as we told you earlier about Hindu, the Vedas and Hindu culture. The article says there's never been any conflict here. Why are these conflicts coming up? What has changed, It says there's never been an orthodox view of creationism in Hinduism until this political party showed up and started challenging things. While Hindu mythology sees avatars as stages of consciousness, this Hindutva jingoist interpreted as a theory of evolution that long preceded Darwin. It makes just as much sense as Darwinism, to be honest. Goes on to talk about Christian orthodoxy, doesn't, has a problem with it. Islamic orthodoxy frowns on Darwinism as well. But tragedy and despair, my friends, that's what we're looking at here. Look at these articles that pop up here. This is what evolutionary naturalism causes. Dear therapist, I divorced my dying wife once she was no longer lucid. After 5 years of being her caregiver, I couldn't bear the emotional or financial costs any longer. So as soon as she became sick enough that she didn't know what was going on, he found the dirtiest lawyer he could find and divorced his wife. Because after all, he's 55 years old and he needs to go live his life, and his ex is just not capable of understanding cognitively. She doesn't know I'm gone, so my family supports me, so it's okay, right? His ex's family doesn't support him, but he felt like he needed to move on with his life. That is the core of evolutionary naturalism, because there's nothing wrong with that if Darwin is true. There's nothing wrong with leaving a sick partner. Writes Julie Burchill, writing for The Spectator here. There's a story of this couple here. This is Danielle Epstein and the guy here. I can't remember. His name is, I forgot his name. We'll be covering this story for you at some point anyway. But so they were dating, obviously, and they were going to buy a house together. They were in the process of buying the house together, and this poor guy gets sick, finds out he's got a brain tumor, goes through 14 months of radiation and chemotherapy, and this lady here decides that it's just too much. She can't deal with it. He had to have surgery right away. So they were looking for a house in August, and he got sick right around that time, and he had surgery in September. And when he came out of the surgery, he had to learn to walk again because of a complication there. It's brain surgery. That happens. So she decided she was going to leave him. Right, because she had things to do. It was just too much. It was, look, she was having to take medicine just to deal with her own anxiety. She couldn't deal with this guy anymore. Now, they're not married, but this is basic commitment stuff, folks. There is a twist to this story it's awful. I'm going to share that with you at a different time, because this story needs its own platform. I'll share this with you later. So she leaves him, goes to live in Thailand to live it up, and he supports her. What happens when a society takes individualism to its logical conclusions and assisted suicide becomes the norm, no matter what age you are, no matter how young you are? That is a real thing today, folks. These are realities in our world today. The Netherlands have just made a very controversial decision on the end of life. And that is to allow children Netherlands legalizes parents euthanizing their sick children. When Canada's death cult parliament was arguing about whether they should extend medical assistance in dying to minors, the Netherlands came through with their own. Elon Musk says he agrees with assisted suicide if someone is a mature adult, but definitely not kids. I would say, Elon, they're both equally abhorrent. Life is precious. All of it. Right? This extends abortion to 225 months. That's true. In Oregon waives nixing residency requirement for euthanasia, officially opening the door for suicide tourism. Right? So you can go to Oregon and get your suicide, you can get whatever, Canadian panel pushes assisted suicide for minors without parental consent. Without parental consent, only evolutionary naturalism could bring you something so ridiculously horrible as that. Toronto area man jailed for counseling suicide, causing 2 deaths. It goes on and on. These are tragedy and despair, my friends. In both ancient and modern forms, tragedy and despair are based on a view that there is not a creation nor a creator, but that at the back of everything are impersonal forces, so that the universe is faceless. It's ultimately dark out there. Such emptiness makes a tremendous difference in how to view everyday life, as well as how to handle the mysteries of existence, how to think about what do you do when your mate, when your wife, or your husband, or just your boyfriend gets sick. How do you respond? What is your standard? But if a loving, infinite, personal God who does have a face, which we have seen in Jesus Christ, is behind it all, then the struggles of life can't bear a profoundly different meaning. The Holy Scriptures reveal the one who stands behind all created reality. The Bible doesn't start with apologetics. The Bible doesn't start with fancy arguments. The Bible starts simply with God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the New Testament, the prologue to John's Gospel says, in the beginning, in arche and hologos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and all things were made through Him. Without Him was not anything made that was made. Hebrews 11:3 backs that up. Through faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the Word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. The Bible starts off with a person. Evolutionism begins with impersonal matter and energy and random activity and chance. It is never able to answer the question of how it got there, nor what it means once it is there. Indeed, as famous Dutch theologian and statesman Abraham Kuyper once pointed out, naturalistic philosophy excludes the possibility of ever learning the truth about origins by neglecting essential facts about the condition of man, who is the learner. If you don't know who you are, you can't hope to understand why you're here. Right? The essential facts before you can know anything about creation is the condition of yourself, the condition of the learner, your fallenness, your need for regeneration, and your need for divine revelation. In contrast, the Bible tells us how energy and matter got here. And in doing so, the Bible shows what it all means. What is the purpose? It came through the creative speaking of a personal God, the one true God who exists in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who is light, in whom there is no darkness at all. He is love, He is holiness, He is goodness. Out of His light and love and holy goodness, He created this vast, complex universe that we inhabit by His grace. And He is the one, the only one, who is able to give us the basic outline of what happened when He brought this creation into being. God provides us such information in the first 3 chapters of Genesis. You get all of that in the first 3 chapters of the Bible. For since only God was there, we have to get our information about it from Him. Nothing can be more logical or more intelligent than to accept the information from the one who made it, from the one who was the eyewitness, from the one who is truth. It is to see these early chapters of God's Word. That is where we see the answers to all of these questions. So to bring it all back home now, it was the Enlightenment, that period of time when we saw a spike in human progress and the redefinition of religion and much higher confidence in man's autonomous powers of reason and science. Therefore, from the 18th century onwards, science became separated from theology, and the idea of theology as the queen of sciences gave way to science as just a series of autonomous disciplines where man could receive information and knowledge apart from God's Word and furnish humanity with the tools by which to transform the political order. As the pursuit of knowledge apart from God's Word proliferated, people were led to believe that because of Newton's discovery of the laws of motion, we can use that to discover similar laws that determine human behavior. And modern scientism grew out of the belief that an exact parallel existed between nature and human behavior, or sociology. The idea is that humanity can be managed scientifically. Just as universal laws govern events in nature, there are universal laws of human nature that can be harnessed. They can be harnessed by a few for great power. All that would be needed is for one to come along who would provide that sociological interpretation to pave the way for continued human progress. As we mentioned earlier, Hegel had established this foundation already in his dialectic. Karl Marx, a devotee of Hegel, came along in the 19th century and provided just such a system where humanity would be scientifically managed for the greater good. In fact, communism is the scientific management of the masses, and Marx and Engels laid this system out in the Communist Manifesto, which is, as we can plainly see, the logical progression of science separated from theology, or when true religion, knowledge of God, is relegated to a subgenre of anthropology, when the creature is exalted above the creator. Scientism comes of age. Scientism is the belief that the methods of science, quantitative calculations, are the only means by which any knowledge may be attained, and to total denial of all qualitative disciplines such as ethics and, of course, religion. The most concise definition of scientism is that of Albert H. Hobbes, who said scientism as a belief that science can furnish answers to all human problems. Make science a substitute for philosophy, religion, for manners and morals even, right? Science becomes a replacement for manners and morals, a replacement for social problems. The natural world under Copernicus and Galileo and Francis Bacon became a machine. And by the 17th century, and Galileo stated the world moved with mathematical precision because it operated under the quantifiable laws of mathematics. And so people understood the world more as a machine than as a living, breathing spirit. Remember the views of biology, of Darwinism? It's mechanistic. It's a blind watchmaker universe. One can study a machine because it invariably it follows laws that are easily delineated by science. God was dropped out of the picture. Man no longer needed to appeal to a plan of God to explain the movements of the universe. The appeal to internal natural forces at work in the world meant that efficient causes replaced the discussion of final cause. Transcendent purpose gave way to empirical facts. And the 18th century naturalists, with their clockwork universe and the idolatry of the church, flung the door wide open for the soulless work of Charles Darwin and of Karl Marx in the 19th century. And soon after, the 20th century would see the expression of naturalism and scientism informing political order through communism, authoritarianism and totalitarianism, but specifically in the 20th century through communism. The political ideology responsible for as many as 180 million deaths between the Soviet, Chinese, and Southeast Asian governments alone. The metaphor for the New Age is interpretation, and enlightened man is the willful imposer of meaning. As Friedrich Nietzsche put it, there are no facts. Everything is in flux, incomprehensible, elusive. What is relatively most enduring is our opinions. Unquote. In the vacuum created by the anti-metaphysical bias of Nietzsche and his successors, the scientism of logical positivism arose in the early 20th century. It holds that the only way to acquire knowledge about the world is through empirical observation and logical analysis of sensory experience. Statements or claims that cannot be verified by empirical evidence or logical analysis are meaningless. They are nonsensical. Your religious claims are nonsensical. Genesis, in the beginning, God, is just nonsense. Any and all religious and supernatural beliefs, as well as traditional philosophical and metaphysical claims, are just out of line. They are not to be discussed. We also see the importance of language as a tool of both construction and destruction. Language as a tool of control. Even in the early stages of metaphysical naturalism, positivists also developed the principle of verifiability, right? This is, anyone who defends Darwinism is going to give you this, the principle of verifiability, which states that a statement is meaningful only if it can be empirically verified or falsified. Sadly, for the positivists, and let's be honest, also sadly for postmodernists as well, modern-day atheists, their own principle of verifiability does not withstand the rigors of logic, as that statement itself cannot be empirically verified. So positivism died out by the mid-20th century, but the turn toward untethered linguistics, using language for control, had already been established. And as such, truth became nothing more than a property of logical form and language, where reality, quote unquote, can be constructed or deconstructed according to conversations and syllogisms, right? We just want a seat at the table. We just want to have a conversation. Because in those conversations, that's where That's where they're going to state their truth and speak it into existence. Christianity's influence, with its claims to objective truth and knowledge of the absolute creator and sustainer of all truth, was soon mitigated and quickly relegated to myth. And by the scientific elite, they deemed Christianity responsible for the oppression and barbarity and the superstition that marked Western civilization's major declines. The scientist is certainly religious, folks. The purpose of the autonomous rebellion from theology of the Enlightenment forces was seen as the greatest opportunity in history for overcoming evil and establishing a just society. And that reason, joined with science, could prophetically map the future. That's the Enlightenment. Now we know the destiny of man, and this successfully can eradicate individual and social evils. That's the promise of the Enlightenment, the age of reason. All this in rebellion to the creator and sustainer of the source of all truth. Dialectical materialism is the worldview. That's the philosophical framework developed by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels as part of their analysis of history, economics, and politics. That is thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. I mentioned earlier Hegel. This is what we want to get you to understand, is that Darwinism, being informed by Marx, which roundabout by Hegel, and this new dialectic put on top of Darwinism, this method of reasoning that involves the synthesis of opposing viewpoints with the materialist understanding of reality, which asserts that the material world is the basis of all reality. Dialectical materialism in the development of human history is seen as the result of the contradictions between the forces of production and the relations of production, or the relationships between people. These contradictions lead to class struggle as different groups compete for resources and control over production. It also emphasizes the importance of historical materialism, which asserts that the material conditions of society are what shape human consciousness and social development. So through this lens, dialectical materialism aims to provide a scientific understanding of the historical development of societies and the struggle for social and economic justice. Do you remember the title? Do you remember the title of Darwin's book? Somewhere I'll find it here. There we go. The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. So this is the connection, folks. This is the connection where we're talking about the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum. These are the foundations. We've got Darwin, who has identified that there are favored races. And here he's going to show how these favored races make it to the top. And you've got Marx, who comes along behind, and he's going to apply this theory to society. If Darwinism is true, then it becomes possible for a banana to become a baboon, for a baboon to become a banker. But it's even worse than that. Evolutionary naturalism supports abiogenesis, life from non-life, which we've talked about already. Something that none of this has ever been observed, nor will it ever be observed. There are core doctrines of Darwinism that are not only unscientific, but they're flat out nonsense. What about chance? Let's let this one be the last point for tonight. What about chance? Right? That's the final piece of the puzzle. If you can If you can refute chance, if you can refute that anything random happens, then you've destroyed Darwinism. You've destroyed evolutionary naturalism. And you have created a context where people can again trust God. Pierre Delbé, a French physician and researcher who developed a solution for disinfecting wounds in the battlefield in World War I. He was a pioneer of radiation therapy for cancer treatment and published over 300 scientific papers and wrote several books throughout his career. So, smart man. He said, chance has become for me a soft pillow, like the one which only ignorance and disinterest can provide. But this is a scientific pillow. Arthur Kessler, a prolific essayist and commentator on politics, culture, science, philosophy, and spirituality. Arthur Kessler, he's famous for writing The Ghost in the Machine, a critique of behaviorism and materialism in psychology. He said, as long as chance rules, God is anachronism. It is true that if chance rules, God cannot. That is very true, but it's even worse. The mere existence of chance is enough to remove God from his throne. Simply put, if chance really exists in any form, God cannot exist. Chance and God are mutually exclusive. The existence of chance destroys God's self-attested attribute of omniscience. God has told us himself in special revelation that he is all-knowing. Therefore, the existence of chance destroys God's self-attested attribute of omniscience. If God is not all-knowing, then he is not God. And if he is not God, then he is not at all. And so the opposite is also true. If God exists, then chance cannot exist. It's one or the other. The two cannot coexist by reason of the impossibility of the contrary. But the word chance, the word certainly does exist, and it has a checkered past. The word chance refers to mathematical possibilities. And in this sense, chance is it's a formal word with no material content. For example, thought experiment. If we flip a coin, what are the chances of that coin landing on heads or tails? Well, that's a trick question. It's 100%. It's going to land on heads or tails 100% of the time, unless it lands on its side, which is not likely. It is 100% certain that unless the coin lands on its edge and stays that way, it will land heads up or tails up. What are the chances the coin will land heads up only? 50-50. Now we're advancing the argument here. That's 50-50. Now we have a different concept at work. Now we're talking about odds. Odds are calculations. What are the odds that the coin lands heads up 7 times in a row? Now, mathematicians and odds makers in Las Vegas, they get paid the big bucks to figure things like that out. What are the odds of something happening? The odds of an event. The odds of the outcome of an event. What are the odds of catching an ace in 4 straight hands at a blackjack table running a 5-deck shoe? They know. They know and they watch. But one thing Vegas does not do is chance. They're not games of chance. They're games of mathematical possibilities. So the question is this: how much influence does chance have on the outcome of the blackjack deal or the coin toss? The answer is 0. There is no possibility that chance can have any effect on any outcome whatsoever. Why not? As R.C. Sproul writes in his great little book titled Not a Chance, God, Science, and the Revolt Against Reason, quote, because chance has no power to do anything, it is cosmically, totally, consummately impotent, unquote. Now, we can be very dogmatic. We can be religious on this point. Chance has no power to do anything because chance is simply not anything. It has no power because chance has no being. Now, again, we're into metaphysics here. It's the study of causes, what came first. It's the study of being and knowing, time and space. What is this thing? It's metaphysics. Specifically, we're talking here about ontology. It means we're talking about the nature of a thing. What are its properties or its attributes? How do they relate, for instance, what words, if any, could you use to describe or identify chance? Well, what we know about its being is that chance has none. Chance is not a thing. It's not an entity. Chance has no being, and therefore it has no power to affect anything else. Chance is nothing. Chance is no thing. To be more precise, nothing cannot do something. Nothing is not. It has no isness. Chance is not. Okay? What are the chances that chance can do anything? Not a chance. It has no more chance to do something than nothing has to do something. Now, you shouldn't be confused. All of that flowery wording just to say that chance is not a force of nature to cause or change anything. We live in a universe. We live in a world created by God with a telos, with a purpose. It has meaning. It has purpose. Nothing happens in this mortal coil. Nothing happens apart from God allowing it. As R.C. Sproul has said before, there is not a single maverick molecule in all the universe. Hebrews tells us again that the Creator holds it up with the word of his power. Power of his word. Then comes along, though, we're talking about the word chance, and it has no being. It talks about possibilities. It's a word with no material being. It has no power. But then comes along the evolutionist or the TV science expert or the college science professor, and suddenly a shift occurs. When the origins of humanity or the origin of the universe or the development of apes into human beings over long epochs of time are the topic, suddenly the word chance shifts from a probability concept to a formal word, or from a formal word with no material content. Chance suddenly becomes a real force, an actual thing. Chance becomes a causal force. All of a sudden, chance, now it has being. How did that happen? With the addition of another seemingly harmless word put beside chance, the word by. Sproul writes, he says, when we say things happen by chance, the term by is implied as a dative of means. It implies by means of. Apes became human beings by means of chance. Suddenly, chance is given instrumental power. Chance is like the strong and weak nuclear force. Chance is suddenly like gravity. Chance becomes the means by which things come to pass. Chance suddenly, somehow assumes a certain power. And it now can affect change in the material world. Something that is reality is nothing. Something that Something that is real. That's what got me. Something that is really nothing now has the ability or power to do something. Remember Delbey and his soft pillow from earlier? In 1913, he wrote, quote, "Chance appears today as if it's a law, the most general of all laws. Chance becomes a law of nature." Stanley Jakey provides a bold critique of the sloppiness by which the word chance is used in scientific discussion. Jakey calls this the softest philosophical pillow in all scientific history, adding that, quote, "Once more, as so often in that history, most successful mathematical formulas served as magic tools for making shabby philosophizing a most respectable attitude. In fact, chance becomes a magic word for evolutionists, no different than the incantations abracadabra or voila. When scientists attribute instrumental power to chance, they have then left the domain of physics or science, and they have resorted to magic. Do you hear what we're saying? Darwinism, evolutionary naturalism, all of these people, Sean Carroll, who are the astrophysicists who told us male and female is just a social construct, it's not real. These people who will accuse you of being superstitious have resorted to magic. Chance is their magic wand. Chance is their magic wand to make not only rabbits, but entire universes appear out of nothing. Delbey's metaphor is a good one. Chance is indeed a soft pillow. Pillows are used for sleeping. It's an aid to comfort. The soft pillow of chance has introduced a whole new era of dogmatic slumber. When the scientist dreams of chance, he's dreaming of nothing. Puritan theologian and philosopher Jonathan Edwards once mused, "Nothing is the same that the sleeping rocks dream of." No matter how comfortable the pillow, even in your wildest dreams, chance, which is nothing, cannot do something. To attribute causal power, or any power, to chance is magical thinking. The pillow image suggests a lapse into unconsciousness by which otherwise brilliant thinkers take a nap. Their rational faculties have gone to sleep, blissfully imitating the rocks while they dream of nothing. But this is no dream. This is a nightmare. It's a nightmare for the sciences. The natural sciences are a perfectly wonderful tool for discerning our world and our universe and for solving the most difficult problems of health or solving our environmental needs. But such fraudulence and subterfuge as this, right? The whole climate change agenda is founded on fraudulence and subterfuge. To invoke chance as if it were a force of nature, that reduces scientific investigation not only to chaos, but to sheer absurdity. However, Darwinism, technically evolutionary naturalism, remains to this day a cornerstone of modern biology. And it is a religious dogma in the greater scientific community. You will hear it said that Darwin's theory has been supported by extensive evidence from various fields of science, biology. However, it is not so difficult to see how that is not true. While the scientific method holds true, science is not a cudgel for forcing one's dogmatic delusions onto others. Darwinism has been and still is the core dogma of authoritarianism and ethnic oppression worldwide. Again, from vaccine mandates, from the technocratic management of inoculation of the masses to abortion and the sanitizing of the snuffing out of a growing defenseless preborn baby. Let's speak plainly here. What has Darwinism done for us? The brutal, bloody dismemberment of a little human being? Being championed as a fundamental right, relabeled as reproductive rights. It's access to health care. This is what evolutionary naturalism causes. This is what Darwin causes. The late Dr. Bernard Nathanson did thousands of abortions, thousands of these dismemberments. He was trained in the core doctrine of Darwinism. Human beings are just animals, no different. It's all chance. There is no real meaning. Therefore, dignity is just a social construct. But one day a thought hit him. What about the humanity of all this? 8 years of medical school. And it took him 20 years into his practice before he ever stopped to think, what about the humanity of all of this? Why do we take an oath to do no harm? What difference does it make if we do harm? Well, Dr. Nathanson was given eyes to see, and he saw the truth. And by God's grace, he walked away from the clinic and became a pro-life activist. This was the 1980s, and science had progressed to the point where it was possible to see what was happening in the womb. You see, a doctor never really sees what he's doing. He inserts a tube, turns on a pump, and a pile of tissue is collected in a bag that's discarded. But in 1984, Dr. Nathanson decided that he wanted to see what was happening. So he asked a friend who was doing up to 20 abortions a day, do me a favor. Next Saturday, when you're doing all these abortions, put an ultrasound on the mother and videotape it for me. He did. Later on, Dr. Nathanson was editing the footage for a documentary. His friend, the doctor, the abortionist who had recorded the footage, was present in the studio with him. And the sight of these images on the screen, the sight of his own work, this man was so affected that he quit the clinic, never did another abortion. Even Dr. Nathanson, who said upon watching these images for the first time, he said, though I had not done an abortion in 5 years, even I was shaken to the very roots of my soul by what I saw. Dr. Nathanson turned that footage into the now famous film, The Silent Scream, which had a major impact on the abortion debate of the 1980s. Dr. Nathanson isn't the only abortion provider to be affected by such images. Abby Johnson, the former manager of a Planned Parenthood clinic, became pro-life on the spot when she saw an ultrasound abortion of a 13-week-old preborn baby. She watched the baby being torn apart on the screen, and in that instant realized how wrong she had been in supporting and promoting abortion. Joan Appleton, another abortion clinic worker, had a similar conversion when she saw an ultrasound-guided abortion and saw the baby struggling to get away from the instruments. Why do we do these things? Why do we do these things? evolutionary naturalism. It is the ideology of your adversary, Satan. Man's just an animal. There is no design, there is no meaning, no purpose to the universe or our lives. This is survival of the fittest, and those babies were just not big enough to fight back, and since they were a nuisance to a woman's career or an embarrassment to a young girl or a family's reputation, our society has decided that it's not a big deal. It's such not a big deal that we can do it 1,000,000 times. We can kill 1,000,000 babies every year. They're just clumps of tissue if you believe that evolution is true. And mankind is nothing more than a random mutation. Who cares? People fighting for no-fault divorce everywhere. People clamoring to the government to make it easier to break their vows of marriage, vows they made to God, to make it easier to renege on a lifetime commitment, to make it easier to break promises we make to each other before God, to make it easier to do that which God hates. People are clamoring for it. Culture progressing. Women becoming more autonomous, creating circumstances where young women are more vulnerable. And so we get Ted Bundy. The demoralization of society necessarily leads to the destabilization of it. When the desire for human autonomy is allowed to go unchecked, the result is always tragedy. Women's liberation, bodily autonomy, abortion, sexual freedom. Moral of the story is that the desire to glorify our feelings, our personal desires and dreams, apart from God's good design, when we separate science from theology, can only lead to a sense of emptiness that can never be filled, as well as pain, suffering, and sadness. The transgender movement, to the insanity of grown men invading women's intimate spaces, men beating women almost to death, calling it inclusivity in sports. The satanic spirit behind evolutionary naturalism. It can be seen everywhere today. As we talked about, the growing global popularization of assisted suicide, not just for the elderly, but for young children. Examples of objectively bad things being called constructs, then deconstructed and relabeled with softer, less problematic terms. Abortion is health care. Leaving a loved one when they're facing life-threatening disease, well, that's bravery. Suicide is dying with dignity. Well, that's where we are, folks. That's what it comes down to. How long will you limp between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. Scientific dictatorship is where we are. And I hope I've been able to make that point clear here tonight. My friends, culture does not need a new savior. Right? Those new saviors are a dime a dozen. What the world needs is the living Christ, who comes to confront all of us in truth and to perfect us in grace. And Armor of Truth, our prayer Our goal is to apply the fully sufficient and authoritative Word of God universally to all of life. It is all of Christ for all of life. And Lord willing, with the support of you, our viewers and listeners, we intend to reset and refresh the agenda for Christian cultural engagement in our generation. We can only do that with you and your help. Beyond the vague concept of progress and the greater good, we're preparing the hearts of believers today for the onslaught of the spirit of the age, which, make no mistake, hates us for our love of Christ and our commitment to truth. We're confronting the follies and ills of social justice with a biblical social theory that is radically different from all other social theories. In the spirit of the reformers, and in response to the rebellion of Enlightenment thinking, we aim to make a complex world comprehensible. And we seek nothing less than a total worldview revolution. We don't expect this to be a comfortable ride. In fact, we know it won't be. And we rejoice at the opportunity to suffer for Christ and His gospel as His Spirit brings conversions through His ambassadors, one heart at a time. We're not proclaiming ourselves, but Christ as King, and we are His servants. Faith is resistance.
Well, that's a rather interesting position coming from a man on a crusade against the evils of technology.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth. Live.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel and log on armoroftruth.net.
Good luck. We're all counting on you.